to impose interim conditions and accept mitigation undertakings. The bill would remove the Governor in Council, replacing it with the Minister in making an order for further national security review, and involve the Governor in Council in the results of the national security review only if the investment is found after investigation to be injurious to national security. It supposedly will improve coordination with international partners and strengthen rules for the protection of information in judicial review proceedings. In essence, this bill will give the Minister of Industry more time and authority to assess foreign transactions that might compromise national security by removing the Governor in Council from the initial process, while also making more severe the penalties for violating the Investment Canada Act. This on its face is beneficial and necessary, but there are several gaps that need to be addressed, which I will outline later. Threats to our national security and sovereignty come in a dizzying array with regard to scope and creativity. Today, I want to focus on threats to our national security via our economy by investment from actors with malicious intent. There is just cause to update and strengthen the Investment Canada Act to prevent such threats, or at the very least, reduce the number of threatening actions made to Canada's economy and national security via investment. There exists a scary number of examples wherein Canada's national security was jeopardized due to a lack of due diligence on behalf of the Industry Minister with regard to foreign direct investment. The Industry Minister's 2021 mandate letter directed the Minister to contribute to broader efforts to promote economic security and combat foreign interference by reviewing and modernizing the Investment Canada Act to strengthen the national security review process and better identify and mitigate security threats from foreign investment. Key words: better identify and mitigate security threats. There is ample evidence to show why the Prime Minister so directed the Industry Minister, as the Liberal record on allowing bad actors to invest in Canadian companies, and therefore our intellectual property and data, is rather horrifying. In 2017, the Minister of Industry failed to request a full national security review of the acquisition of a BC-based telecommunications company, Norsat International, and its subsidiary, Sinclair Technologies, by China-based Hytera Communications, which is partially owned by the People's Republic of China. The Chinese government owns about 10% of Hytera Communications through an investment fund. The United States, our largest and most important trading partner, blacklisted Hytera in 2021. Their Federal Communications Commission says the company poses an unacceptable risk to the national security of the United States or to the security and safety of United States persons. Sales and imports of Hytera equipment are banned in the U.S. as a result. And our Industry Minister let this company, with its ties to the Chinese ruling Communist Party, buy a Canadian company. It gets better, or should I say, it gets worse. Hytera Communications is also facing 21 charges in an American espionage case. The United States Department of Justice is accusing the firm of conspiring to steal trade secrets from Motorola. We know this tactic has been used before by the Chinese government, and yet our Industry Minister okayed a sale of a Canadian company right to them. In 2019, Manitoba-based Tantalum Mining Corp. Of Canada Limited, also known as TANCO, was purchased by the Chinese company Sinamine Resources. It was approved by the Liberals with no national security review. The mine produces lithium and more than 65% of the world's cesium, which is used in drilling applications, as well as Canada's largest deposit of tantalum, which is used in electronics. Sinamine was recently ordered by the government in November to divest itself of its investment of Power Metals Corp., a different mining exploration firm in Vancouver, but the government was apparently totally fine with its continued ownership of the Tanco mine and its critical minerals operations, as their divestment order said nothing about it. In 2020, our Department of Global Affairs awarded a $6.8 million contract to state-owned, China-based NucTech, which was founded by the son of the former Chinese Communist Party Secretary General. $6.8 million of Canadian taxpayer money, basically directly into the Chinese Communist Party's pockets, along with precious data. As John Ivison wrote for the National Post in 2020, Newtech is known as the Huawei of airport security. The contract was to supply security equipment for 170 Canadian embassies, consulates, and high commissions around the globe. A security industry source told Ivison for the story that he was concerned there were now significant pieces of Chinese technology sitting in every embassy, and that the contract included delivery, installation, operator training, and software. For the same article, Guy Saint-Jacques, a former Canadian ambassador in Beijing, explained that the Chinese business strategy overseas is to win market share and, once dominant, dictate prices, illustrating that not only are there security concerns with these problematic investments, but there's also long-term economic implications. We cannot continue to let China and other actors with malicious intent interfere with Canada's economy and national security, even if they do offer the lowest prices for the service. That said, the pattern of allowing risky investments without full security reviews continues. It was apparently briefly acknowledged in 2021, with the industry minister updating and enhancing guidelines for national security reviews of transactions involving critical minerals and state-owned enterprises in March of that year, but 2022 saw a number of lapses, even with this enhanced protocol. In January 2022, the minister failed to follow his own updated guidelines when he fast-tracked the takeover of the Canadian lithium company Neo Lithium Corp by Chinese state-owned Zijin Mining, again without a national security review. Wesley Wark, a visiting professor at the University of Ottawa, who specializes in international affairs and intelligence gathering, told the Industry and Technology Committee while studying the takeover after the fact that it was a mistake. The value of the transaction was close to $1 billion. Then, in November of 2022, the minister ordered 3 Chinese companies to divest their ownership of 3 critical mineral firms, but Neo Lithium was not included. In December of 2022, possibly the worst offense, the RCMP awarded a contract to supply sensitive hardware for the communications systems to Sinclair Technologies, which, if you'll recall, was sold to Hytera Communications, that Chinese company partially owned by the Communist Party and blacklisted in the U.S. It was also revealed in December of that year that the Canadian Border Services Agency had been using communications equipment and technology from Hytera. A CBC story says that public services and procurement didn't take into consideration the security concerns about Sinclair and the ownership during the bidding process. Mr. Speaker, the difference between the Quebec-based Comprods offer was $60,000. The Liberals love to hand out money left and right. They couldn't spend $60,000 and keep our security hardware domestically sourced and provide Canadians with jobs while we're at it. So as we can see, the bill is sorely needed, but there are a few areas for improvement within the bill itself. I don't like the part that requires or gets rid of the governing council approval and gives the power just to the minister, so I think that should be fixed. And the legislation should also consider updating the Act's definition of a state-owned enterprise, which is now too vague. There's no provision to block any subsequent takeover by a state-owned enterprise of a previous Investment Canada Act-approved acquisition. And so, Madam Speaker, it's my hope that the government learns from its mistakes, listens to the opposition parties and experts, and gets this legislation right. We can't keep selling off parts of our economy, national security, and precious resources to bad actors. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Madam Speaker, I love the last line about learning from mistakes. There is the Conservative Party that when there was warning after warning about Chinese state companies stealing IP from Canadian companies, Stephen Harper was selling off key assets, $15 billion in Nexen, to a state-owned company. That when HD Mining in British Columbia, a Chinese company, announced they couldn't hire Canadian workers, Stephen Harper gave them 14 years to bring in Chinese workers to exploit Canadian assets. And Stephen Harper thought that was so good, he went and signed a secretive free trade deal that allowed the Chinese state companies to sue any level of government. Can you imagine the United States letting Montana be sued or Miami be sued, but Stephen Harper was more than willing to sell us down the river, sell out our assets, sell out our resources while we warned them about the theft of IP and resources from Canadian or Chinese state companies.
The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I see the outrage in the member opposite, but perhaps he could apply that to the party which he is supporting. Remember this party that sold out healthcare in BC to Ong Bong? Remember that? And then it was a total disaster, and we had to come in and rescue them in the pandemic. Huawei, another example where the government sat on their decision for 2 years and let Huawei build all the 4G networks under Bell and Telus in this country. So why doesn't he take his outrage and apply it to the government that he's propping up? Thank you.
The honourable parliamentary secretary to the government house leader, Senate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the member has identified some areas which she suddenly feels need to be addressed. I'm curious if she can tell the House how many times, because we are in fact only amending a piece of legislation here, can she tell the House how many times she has raised her concerns with the minister before today specifically about how the legislation should be changed?
Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. That's a great question, actually, because you may recall that I was on my feet in this House criticizing Navdeep Bains when he was the industry minister that did Ong Bong. I was on my feet in this House criticizing every time one of these things has come along and calling it out because of the danger and the breach to our privacy and the fact that they're allowing the Chinese Communist government to put security systems and information systems and software into parliament, embassies, etc. It's outrageous. It needs to get fixed. I've been calling for this now for 8 long years. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
L'honorable député de Pierre-Boucher, les Patriotes, Verchères.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I share my colleagues' concerns with regards to Chinese investments, which are sometimes ill-advised, partially attributable to the laxism of the government on the other side. Recently, in Quebec, there was a Chinese individual who was arrested at Hydro-Quebec's headquarters. The Liberals like to talk a lot about electrifying our energy infrastructure, but there was a person who was taking photos and collecting data and communicating that to the Chinese government at Hydro-Quebec. All that to come to a question on the bill before us. When I was elected in 2015 for the first time, we were talking about foreign investments. There were notices of investment sent to the government, and according to government data, in 2015, 10% of foreign investments were analyzed by the government. The most recent data shows us 1% is being reviewed. What does my colleague think of that? The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague from the Bloc for that question. Yes, absolutely. There are many examples of security problems. Organizations here in Canada did not make good choices.
Les détails des accords.
There needs to be better review of details. And I think we would like to see that in Bill C-34.
Reprise du débat.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member.